Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shanglin Xu, or Kate. I'm from the University of Southern California. And today, I'd like to introduce this work from our collaboration with Novature Research Solutions. The work is titled TraGPT Controlled Synthetic Trajectory Generation using a multitask transformer-based spatial temporal model. So first of all, why do we care about trajectory generation? We want to do human mobility modeling, which has a lot of downstream tasks like traffic, urban dynamics, commerce, health, and equity. And to model human mobility, we will want to have some large and high-quality data. The problem is because of privacy concerns, confidentiality, cost of commercially available data, and just missing observations, the data we can access is usually either small or low quality. To bridge this gap, we do trajectory generation so that we can either fix low quality data or to synthesize new data. What kind of data are we talking about here then? There are several forms of trajectories data. Two of them are sequences of location logs, where each log is associated with the location and a timestamp. The other one is sequences of visits, where each visit is associated with not only the location, but also an arrival time and a departure time. As you can probably imagine, we can convert location logs to visits with some state point detection algorithms. And in this break, we focus on sequences of visits. Sequences of visits are often more irregular, which makes it difficult to generate. Fortunately, there are some works in trajectory generation already. Some of them are computational, for example, moving object generators, like the work from Brinkhoff in 2002, which is very influential. Another line of research is agent-based microsimulations. However, all these kind of computational approaches suffer from the limitation of requiring human labor and expert knowledge, like travel surveys, handcrafted rules, and lots of parameter setting. So there are some data-driven approaches available nowadays, and our work belongs to this category. We learn directly from the data distributions. There are also other works in data-driven category, which are either statistical, adversarial training, variation autoencoder, transformer, large language model based. Some of them deal with the location loss, as I just mentioned, and the others work on the visits. But as far as we know, none of this work can generate sequences of visits with control. Now we can finally define our task of controlled synthetic trajectory generation. Given an input, which is the sequence of visits that is partially specified, for example, this is my trajectory today, probably. I stay up at the hotel at 7 a.m., come to 6 a.m. in the morning, and now I'm giving a speech. But the model doesn't know that, and we want the model to predict the lunchtime, and now giving a speech at 6 a.m. and then go back home. So this is an example data. How difficult can this task be then? I'll talk about each challenges and our solution as an overview first, and then go into the actual approach. For the first challenge, which is kind of technical, it's about a modeling approach. When we, in like the state-of-the-art methods, especially in text, when we think about sequence modeling, we think about two of them. One is mask modeling, such as BERT, and the other one is causal modeling, such as all the models that has GPT in the stem. But if we use mask modeling, then we have to specify the number of missing visits in each gap in advance because of the way that it is constructed and trained. And if we use causal modeling, also by design, it can only attend to one side of the context, which means when the model makes a prediction, it can potentially lead to some contradiction with the other existing visits in the sequence. These two are not ideal, right? So we leverage another approach from the text domain called infilling. This infilling approach, essentially, they add a placeholder like the question mark in the sequence and squeeze the entire context into one side so they can use causal modeling to predict the other side, which are the missing visits that we want. And then by this restructuring, they can actually mitigate the problem of the two. So we leverage that. The second challenge is the temporal challenge. Say this orange line, orange curve, is the actual distribution of the duration of a visit, say our lunch visit. If you get takeout food, it's likely to be much shorter, the time it takes, than dining in. But if we ask the model to predict a point in time, like a timestamp, for example, the expectation, the model learns to predict something very unrealistic. And similarly, if we ask the model to predict the argmax, it will always predict takeout food, but sometimes I want to dine in, right? So to mitigate that, we use a Gaussian mixture model to approximate such temporal distribution that are pretty complex, instead of asking the model to learn to predict specific timestamps. By this learning, we can improve the temporal accuracy. I will explain how we do it in detail later, don't worry. And the third challenge is a spatial temporal challenge. Say now we have two options for lunch. One is food truck, the other is GT hotel restaurant. Then the duration of staying at each will differ a lot too. So similarly, if we ask the model to predict a duration without the knowledge of where that person actually goes to, the expectation will be very unrealistic. If we ask the model to predict an argmax, the model always predicts a food truck, even though the agent sometimes goes to the restaurant. So these are not good either. So our approach to this is spatial temporal joint modeling, which means given that in the sequence we want to predict the next visit, where the next visit can be written as the region, or you can say the location, the next UI, it can be anything, just we use discrete distribution for that. Arrival time and departure time. This is a joint distribution. As we learned from high school probability, a joint distribution can also be broken down into, given the sequence, predicted region, given the sequence and the predicted region, we predict the arrival time. And given the sequence, predicted region, predicted arrival time, we predict the departure time. And this kind of breakdown, natural breakdown of this probability, has a nice property that when we want to find the negative log likelihood loss, the same breakdown can happen here. So this loss function is probabilistic and there are no hyperparameters here. So we can train the entire thing jointly end to end. Okay, now we can talk about the actual model. Now let's look at simplified version of it first. So we have a sequence here, then the first thing we want to do is encode it, and then we will have some module to predict each of the values that we want, right? So the first change we made to it is to restructure the sequence for infilling text. The second one is to do spatial temporal joint modeling. For example, if we have a region prediction here, we will feed that back in the model to predict the arrival time and the departure time. The last one is the temporal GMNs, where we ask the model to learn to predict an entire distribution in time instead of point estimate. Okay, now I'll introduce each black boxes here. The first one is encode visit sequence. Given the sequence that is already restructured, we feed them into space-to-back, time-to-back, and learnable embeddings so the model get a better idea of what those numbers mean. And then we use the transformer encoders to aggregate all this information to get an enriched representation of the sequence. Then, it's the prediction path for region. This next region is simply classified over the entire space, so we give probability to all the cells in our discretized space, actually. Say we select this lunch place here, then this lunch place is then used to predict the arrival time. We use the lunch place as a query and use cross attention to attend to the sequence representations again to get the distribution of the arrival time. And this is very similar for the departure time, except that the predicted arrival time is again encoded and fed back in, infused in the Q query in order to get the prediction of the departure time. Great. If you understood nothing from there, it's okay. Now it's a summary. Essentially, ChatGPT takes in this sequence with some missing visits and predicts three distributions. One is the region distribution, and the others are the arrival time and departure time continuous distributions. For region distribution, it's pretty straightforward. You can just use top K accuracy to evaluate it. But for this temporal continuous distributions, because we want to compare our approach with those point estimates, so we had to define a new metric for us to compare with them. This metric is called top T accuracy. Top T accuracy is the metric that we define, and it essentially says the probability of being accurate within T minutes. Say this is the predicted distribution that we have, and there's a ground truth point here. We take the interval of plus T minutes to minus T minutes within the ground truth, and the area on the curve will be the probability that our distribution gives, like falls between the plus minus T minutes of the ground truth location. So it's kind of an accuracy in the continuous sense. Finally, we can look at the results. We experimented with our method on two data sets, GeoLife, which is a real-life data set, and Mobilism is simulated, but it's larger. And we used Uber H3 index cells to discretize our space for those discrete space distribution. And also from the data, we sampled 20% of visits as the missing ones for our evaluation. Combine all this, we get a controlled generation result. We compare our model with GetNext, which is kind of state-of-the-art next POI recommender. We had to modify it for controlled generation because that's our formulation. And from the result table, you can see that for both arrival time and departure time, our model achieves much higher temporal accuracy. There are other results in the paper, but because of the time, we couldn't show them. And we also did ablation studies, which is very interesting. So we test our model with an independence between space and time, which means we ask the model now to predict space and time independently, like others do. Then it turns out the model achieves much lower accuracy with that. And that is especially significant. We asked the model to predict the timestamp point estimates, in other words, instead of the distributions. And for both of them, we can see that the departure time distribution, the accuracy of departure time distribution degrades more than the arrival time. This is possibly because for departure time, they are derived from the duration, and the variance of duration may be more complex than that of the arrival time, because people may decide how long they want to stay at each place. In summary, on our work, ChatGPT controls synthetic trajectory generation. We introduced a multitask way to train this transformer for the spatial temporal modeling for the missing visits prediction. And we improved temporal accuracy by around 26 times with our spatial temporal joint modeling approach and our temporal Gaussian mixture model approximation. We also showed consistent effectiveness across different experiments. Please refer to our paper for that. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much for this wonderful presentation. Very clear. That's already a question.
And how big were the cells roughly?
Oh, 400 meters for, really for one dose is 400 meters for each edge. And for the other one, I think it's written in the paper there.
So what is your technique generalizable to different kind of trajectories? Like, there are trajectories with landmarks, and trajectory like pedestrians or vehicle trajectory? Because they have different linearity. So trajectories usually have different linearities. Some trajectories, like landmark, like I went from my home to office to traffic, and so on. Other trajectories, like vehicle driving, so there's a point every 5 minutes and so on. So how generalizable is to different kinds of trajectories?
I see. Oh, because we aim to predict the temporal part, which is the main focus of this paper. So our approach is designed for the landmark one set, which is visit-based, not the point-by-point road trajectories.
do you think that it can be generalized somehow, taking something from here?
Yeah, I can see the potential, but I haven't tested it yet, so I can't be certain.
So I actually have two questions. So the first one, in the temporal prediction, did you measure, how do you measure, is it accuracy within an acceptable window that is accurate, or you measure by how much it's missing in terms of absolute error?
Yeah, we tested different, like the plus minus 5 minutes within
Right,
the 5
okay.
minutes window.
5 minutes, okay.
Yeah, and there are also 10 and 20 minutes, so we measure different.
So this is basically data specific because some data sets may not have that resolution. Is it? Yeah, okay. So another question I do have is, so interesting your choice of encoder, your temporal and location encoder. I wonder if you actually, you have started by mentioning probability distribution. Did you look at encoding that probability distribution right away in the embeddings? Of the possibility of within that period and time. Maybe we should have a specific chat about this. Thank you.
Okay, so let's thank Kate again.